The bullet had lodged 3 inches from his heart, and Benjamin James remembered the surgeon's trembling hands more than the pain as he extracted the jagged metal from his chest. 5 years after the war ended, he still woke some nights reaching for wounds that had long since scarred over, the phantom agony of shrapnel tearing through flesh more vivid than any dream. He had drifted west from Virginia in 1871, seeking distance from memories that clung to him like gun smoke, and found himself in Platteville, Colorado, a town growing faster than its marshal could manage, and twice as lawless as any battlefield he had known. The scars that covered his chest and arms kept most folks at a respectful distance. They could see the damage even through his shirt when the fabric pulled tight across his frame, the raised flesh catching shadows in ways that made children stare and women look away. Benjamin did not mind the solitude. He had grown accustomed to it during the long months of recovery in a Washington hospital, lying in rows with other broken men who screamed in languages their wounds had taught them. He worked odd jobs around Platteville, mostly labor that required strength rather than conversation, and kept a room above the livery stable that smelled perpetually of hay and horse sweat. It was early September when Marshal Thornton found him mucking stalls, the late summer heat pressing down on the Front Range foothills with the weight of wet wool. The marshal was a stocky man with silver threading his mustache and eyes that had seen their share of violence without growing comfortable with it. "Benjamin," Thornton said, removing his hat as he stepped into the stable's dim interior. "Got a job that pays better than shoveling shit if you are interested." Benjamin straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his wrist. "What kind of job?" "Protection work. There is a woman staying at the Northern Hotel, came in on yesterday's stage from Denver. Name is Zara Northwood, and she has got trouble following her close enough that she asked me for help. I do not have the men to spare for standing guard, but I thought of you." "Why me?" Thornton's expression shifted into something that might have been sympathy in a softer man. "Because you know how to handle yourself in a fight, and because you look like someone who could stop trouble before it starts. Those scars of yours, they tell a story that makes men think twice." Benjamin considered the offer while a horse snorted in the stall behind him. He had avoided violence since coming to Colorado, had hoped the distance might let him become someone other than a soldier. But his savings were thin, and the approaching winter promised to be harsh at this elevation. "How much?" he asked. $2 a day plus meals." "She is covering the cost herself." It was more money than Benjamin had seen in steady work since the war. He nodded slowly. "When do I start?" "Now would be good. She is in room 12, top floor facing the street." The Northern Hotel was the finest establishment in Platteville, which meant it had glass in all its windows and a carpet in the lobby that had only a few stains. Benjamin climbed the stairs with the careful gait of a man whose body had been rebuilt around fragments of metal, feeling the familiar tightness in his left shoulder where shrapnel still pressed against bone. The doctors had said removing it would do more damage than leaving it be, so he had learned to live with the constant reminder of Antietam, September 1862, when the world had exploded in fire and torn him into pieces. He found room 12 and knocked twice, firm but not aggressive. The door opened a crack, revealing a slice of face dominated by one striking green eye. "Miss Northwood, Marshal Thornton sent me. My name is Benjamin James." The door opened wider, and Benjamin found himself looking at a woman perhaps 25 years old with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a jaw set with the kind of determination he had seen in soldiers holding impossible positions. She was beautiful in a way that seemed almost defiant, as though she had decided to remain lovely despite circumstances that might have hardened someone else beyond recognition. "Mr. James," she said, her voice carrying the educated cadence of the East, "thank you for coming. Please, come inside so I can explain the situation properly." He hesitated at the threshold, aware of propriety even in a frontier town. "Might be better if we spoke in the hallway, miss. Folks talk." "I am well past caring what folks say," Zara replied, but she stepped into the corridor and pulled the door nearly closed behind her. "I appreciate your concern for my reputation, though most of it has already been destroyed." Benjamin waited, studying her face for signs of the trouble Thornton had mentioned. Up close, he could see the faint shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of poor sleep and the way her hands remained still through conscious effort, rather than natural calm. "My father was Thomas Northwood," she began, and Benjamin recognized the name even before she continued. Thomas Northwood had owned silver mines throughout Colorado and wielded influence that reached back to the halls of Congress. His death 3 months prior had been news even in Platteville's saloons. When he died, he left his entire fortune to me, bypassing my uncle entirely. My uncle, Victor Northwood, believes the will was forged and I manipulated a dying man. He has made it very clear that he intends to contest the inheritance by any means necessary. "Any means," Benjamin repeated carefully. "2 men tried to force their way into my Denver hotel room last week. The police interrupted them before they could accomplish whatever they had planned, but I recognized one of them from my uncle's employment. I came to Platteville because my father had property here, a house on the edge of town that I hoped might be remote enough to discourage further attempts. But I saw those same men on the street this morning, which means my uncle knows where I am." Benjamin processed this information with the methodical approach he had developed for assessing battlefield terrain. "What exactly do you need from me, Miss Northwood?" "I need someone to stand between me and whatever my uncle sends next. I need time to establish legal residency in Colorado and file the appropriate claims to my father's estate, where his influence carries less weight than it does in Denver. The lawyer says it will take perhaps 2 weeks to prepare everything. I need to survive those 2 weeks. The marshal could provide protection. The marshal has 3 deputies and an entire town to watch over. You, Mr. James, would have only me. I am willing to pay well for that singular focus." She met his eyes directly when she spoke, and Benjamin saw the steel in her that reminded him of officers who had led charges, knowing the odds made survival unlikely. He understood then that Zara Northwood was not asking him to protect a fragile thing, but rather to serve as the wall behind which a dangerous woman could do what needed doing. $2 a day, he said. "I will need a place to sleep close to wherever you are staying. If you are moving to your father's house, I will need a room there or at least a barn I can bed down in. The house has 6 bedrooms, Mr. James. You may have your choice of 5 of them." "Then I accept, Miss Northwood." Relief flickered across her face so quickly he might have imagined it. She extended her hand, and after a moment's surprise, Benjamin shook it. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused in a way that suggested she was not afraid of work. "We will move to the house tomorrow morning," Zara said. "For tonight, I would appreciate it if you could position yourself outside my door here at the hotel. I will have meals sent up for both of us." Benjamin nodded and took up his post in the hallway, settling onto the floor with his back against the wall opposite her room. It was a position he had held countless times during the war, waiting in trenches or ruined buildings for orders or enemies or dawn. His body remembered the stillness required, the way to let hours pass while maintaining the alertness that might mean the difference between living and dying. Zara opened her door an hour later to find him motionless, his eyes tracking every sound in the hotel with the focus of a man who understood that threats rarely announce themselves. "I brought you coffee," she said, extending a cup, "and dinner will arrive shortly." He accepted the coffee carefully, aware of how his scarred hands looked in the lamplight. The shrapnel had torn through his left forearm in 3 places, leaving patterns of raised tissue that resembled some violent cartography. Zara did not look away from the scars. Instead, she studied them with what seemed like clinical interest. "Auntie Edam," she asked. Benjamin blinked, surprised. "How did you know?" "My father was there as well, with the Connecticut Infantry. He came home with similar marks and a leg that never quite healed right. He said the explosion patterns were distinctive to that particular hell." "Connecticut Infantry saw some of the worst of it," Benjamin said quietly. "I was Virginia Cavalry, 3rd Regiment. We charged into artillery fire that had been meant for the infantry lines. Most of us did not make it halfway." "But you did." "I made it far enough to catch what the cannons were throwing." Zara lowered herself to sit in her doorway, her posture suggesting she had no intention of retreating even if propriety demanded it. "My father never spoke much about the war, but sometimes at night I would hear him walking the halls, and I knew he was back there in his mind. He died of pneumonia, officially, but I think part of him had been dying since 1862, and it just took his body years to catch up." Benjamin understood that particular truth more than he wanted to admit. A lot of men came home as ghosts. Some of us are still figuring out how to be alive again. "Is that why you came west?" Seemed like distance might help. "Turned out you carry the war with you no matter how far you ride." They sat in companionable silence until a boy arrived with dinner, mutton stew and bread that was only slightly stale. Zara insisted Benjamin take half of everything, and they ate on opposite sides of her threshold like soldiers sharing rations between skirmishes. "Tell me about the men following you," Benjamin said as they finished. "Everything you remember about them." Zara set down her bowl and closed her eyes, pulling details from memory. "The taller one has a scar running from his left eye to his jawline, fresh enough that it still pulls his face when he speaks. The shorter one limps on his right side and wears a pistol low on his hip, like he practices the draw. They both dress better than common thugs, good boots and hats that have not seen much weather. My uncle would choose men who could move in respectable circles without drawing attention. Did they speak to you in Denver?" "Not directly, but I heard the tall one talking to the hotel clerk, asking which room was mine. He had a southern accent, Georgia or maybe Alabama." Benjamin filed away each detail, building a picture of the threat. "Tomorrow, when we move to the house, we will go early and take a route that lets me see if we are being followed. Do you have a weapon, a derringer, small enough to hide in my skirts?" "Can you shoot it?" "My father taught me." "I am not an expert, but I can hit what I aim at if it is close enough." "Keep it on you at all times," Benjamin said. "Even in the house, especially in the house. Most people who die surprised do it because they thought they were safe." Something dark passed behind Zara's eyes. "You speak from experience. I have buried friends who thought the fighting was done." They made their plans for the morning, and Benjamin returned to his position in the hallway. Through the night, he listened to the hotel settle into its rhythms, learning the sounds of legitimate guests and late-arriving travelers. Twice he heard footsteps approach along the corridor, and twice his hand found the grip of the revolver he carried, but both times the footsteps passed without stopping. Dawn came gray and cold through the hallway windows. Zara emerged from her room dressed for travel in a practical brown dress with a jacket that would hide the derringer if she carried it as Benjamin had suggested. Her carpet bag looked heavier than it should, and he suspected she had packed more than clothes. "Ready?" he asked. "As I will ever be." They descended through the hotel's back stairs and exited into the alley where the morning had not yet burned off the night's chill. Benjamin led them on a winding route through Platteville's side streets, stopping occasionally to study the road behind them. He spotted the tail within 10 minutes, a man in a brown coat who thought he was being subtle. "We have company," Benjamin said quietly. Brown coat, half a block back on the opposite side. Zara did not turn to look, and he appreciated her discipline. "Is it one of the men from Denver?" "Cannot tell from this distance, but he is following our pattern too closely to be coincidence. Keep walking normally. I want to see what he does when we reach the house." Thomas Northwood's property sat on a low hill overlooking Platteville, a two-story structure built from local timber and stone that suggested both wealth and practicality. A covered porch wrapped around the front and east side, offering views of the town below and the plains stretching toward Kansas. Benjamin studied the approaches while Zara unlocked the front door, noting sight lines and cover positions with the automatic assessment of a soldier. The man in the brown coat had stopped at the base of the hill, pretending to adjust his boot while watching the house. Benjamin committed his features to memory, the narrow face and sandy hair visible beneath the hat brim. "Inside," he told Zara, and followed her across the threshold. The house smelled of disuse, but not neglect. Furniture sat beneath dusty sheets like sleeping ghosts, and the windows had been shuttered against the mountain weather. Zara moved through the rooms with the confidence of someone who had spent time here before, pulling sheets away and opening shutters to let in the morning light. "My father bought this house 10 years ago," she said as Benjamin helped her uncover the main room. "He would come here when Denver became too much, when he needed distance from the mining business and the politics. I visited twice, and both times I thought this might be the most peaceful place in Colorado." "It is isolated," Benjamin observed. "That makes it defensible, but also vulnerable if someone decides to wait us out or come in force." "You think they will?" "I think your uncle wants you scared more than he wants you dead, at least for now. A scared woman might sign away her inheritance to make the threats stop. A dead woman becomes a martyr and complicates the legal situation." Zara considered this while smoothing wrinkles from a sheet. "You are probably right, but that could change if he gets desperate or impatient. Which is why we prepare for the worst possibility, not the most likely one." They spent the morning making the house livable, and Benjamin used the work to learn its geography. He identified 2 good defensive positions, tested the locks on all doors and windows, and noted that the well was close enough to reach quickly if they ended up pinned inside. Zara worked beside him without complaint, carrying firewood and beating dust from curtains with the efficient energy of someone accustomed to doing what needed doing. By noon, they had established a rough headquarters in the kitchen, where windows offered views of the approach road and the back property. Benjamin made coffee on the stove Zara had fired to life, and they sat across from each other at a scarred wooden table. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. James," Zara said, wrapping her hands around her cup for warmth. "If we are to live in the same house for 2 weeks, I would like to know something of the man guarding my door." Benjamin was not accustomed to people asking about his life, but something in Zara's direct gaze made evasion seem like cowardice. "Not much to tell. I grew up in Virginia, joined the cavalry when the war started because I was 18 and stupid and thought it would be glorious. Got blown apart at Antietam, spent a year learning to walk again, and came west when walking seemed insufficient for forgetting." "Do you have family?" "Had parents and a sister. Parents died of typhoid in '66, and my sister married a banker in Richmond." We exchange letters at Christmas, mostly because she feels obligated and I do not want to worry her. No, wife. Benjamin shook his head. The scars make courting complicated. Women see the damage and imagine what other parts might be broken. That seems remarkably shallow. It is practical, he corrected gently. Most women want a husband who can build a life without waking up screaming from nightmares. I have not mastered that particular skill yet. Zara's expression softened. My father's nightmares shook the house sometimes. My mother learned to simply hold him until they passed, and eventually I think he came to trust that someone would be there when the darkness took him. It did not make him less of a man or a husband. Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. She died when I was 16, and I think my father spent every day after trying to earn his way back to her. He threw himself into work and causes and building things, as though he could construct a bridge to wherever she had gone. They talked through the afternoon, trading stories with the cautious intimacy of people who recognize damage in each other. Zara described growing up in her father's shadow, learning the mining business because he had no sons, and refused to believe his daughter was less capable. Benjamin spoke haltingly about the war, finding that Zara listened without the pity or horror that usually accompanied such confessions. As evening settled over the hills, Benjamin took up position on the front porch with a rifle Zara had found in her father's study. The man in the brown coat had not reappeared, but Benjamin knew that meant little. Threats rarely announced themselves before striking. Zara brought him dinner and sat beside him on the porch steps, looking out over Platteville as lamps began to glow in windows below. "Do you think they will come tonight?" she asked. "Probably not. They will watch for a few days, learn our patterns, wait for us to get comfortable, then they will make their move." "You sound very certain." "I have seen this before. Predators are patient when they know the prey is trapped." Zara was quiet for a moment, then said, "I do not intend to be prey, Mr. James. I have noticed that about you, Miss Northwood." She smiled, and Benjamin felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with shrapnel. In the fading light, with her hair coming loose from its pins and determination written across her features, Zara looked like every reason a man might have for believing the future could be better than the past. The first 3 days established a routine. Benjamin woke before dawn and walked the property, checking for signs of intrusion or surveillance. Zara prepared breakfast, and they ate while discussing her legal preparations. She spent mornings writing letters to her lawyer in Denver and reviewing documents her father had left, while Benjamin maintained watch from positions that offered clear views of the approach roads. Afternoons were given to practical work, repairing fence lines and securing shutters, and building a familiarity with the house that might prove critical if things went wrong. Evenings were theirs, and Benjamin found himself looking forward to those hours with an anticipation that surprised him. They would sit on the porch or in the main room, talking about everything except the threat hanging over them. Zara had opinions on politics and mining regulations, and the treatment of Chinese laborers that were fierce and uncompromising. Benjamin discovered he enjoyed arguing with her, matching her intensity with perspective gained from seeing how quickly civilization could collapse when pushed hard enough. On the 4th night, Zara asked him about his scars again, but this time the question was more specific. "Do they hurt?" she asked. "My father's leg pained him constantly, especially when the weather changed." Benjamin considered deflecting, then decided honesty was less exhausting than pretense. "Some of them do. The shrapnel still in my shoulder aches when I have been still too long, and my left arm gets stiff if I use it hard. The doctors said I was lucky, that the metal missed everything vital. I do not always feel lucky." "May I see them?" The request caught him off guard. "Miss Northwood," That is not proper. I am well aware of what is proper, Mr. James, and I stopped caring about such things when my uncle tried to have me kidnapped. I am asking as someone who nursed my father through his injuries and understands what war does to flesh. I am asking because I want to understand what you carry. Benjamin hesitated, then slowly unbuttoned his shirt. The lamplight fell across his chest and arms, illuminating the topography of old violence. Shrapnel scars radiated from the deep crater where the surgeon had extracted the bullet, thin lines and raised patches where fragments had torn through muscle and scraped bone. His left arm was particularly marked, the flesh puckered in places where it had healed badly. Zara studied the damage without flinching. After a long moment, she reached out, stopping just short of touching. "May I?" he nodded, not trusting his voice. Her fingers traced the largest scar on his chest, following its path with clinical precision that gradually became something gentler. "You should be dead," she said quietly. "I know. But you are not. You survived this and everything after, and now you are here." "Now I am here," he agreed. Zara's hand settled over the place where the bullet had nearly found his heart. Benjamin could feel his pulse against her palm, a rhythm that had persisted despite metal and blood loss and despair. "I am glad you are here," she said, meeting his eyes. "I am glad you survived." Something fundamental shifted between them in that moment, a recognition that went beyond employer and employee or even friends. Benjamin covered her hand with his own, and they stayed like that while the lamp burned low, and the night sounds of Colorado filtered through the windows. The kiss happened the next evening, inevitable as weather. They had been arguing about Reconstruction policy, and Zara had made a point so perfectly articulated that Benjamin laughed, actually laughed in a way he had not since before the war. She had smiled at the sound, delighted and surprised. And then they were standing close enough to feel each other's breath, and the distance between them collapsed like a bridge under artillery fire. Zara kissed him first, rising on her toes to close the last few inches, and Benjamin responded with the desperate hunger of a man who had forgotten he was allowed to want things. Her hands found the scars on his chest through his shirt, mapping familiar territory, and he pulled her closer with an urgency that made her gasp against his mouth. They broke apart breathing hard, and Benjamin searched her face for regret or second thoughts. "I have wanted to do that since you told me about your nightmares," Zara said, "since I realized you were as determined to survive your past as I am to escape mine." "This complicates things," Benjamin managed. "Things were already complicated. This just makes them worthwhile." They kissed again, slower this time, learning the shape of something that felt dangerously close to hope. Benjamin's hands shook as they traced the line of Zara's jaw, and she steadied them with her own, anchoring him to the present. "I am still going to guard your door," he said when they finally pulled apart. "I would be disappointed if you did not." That night, Benjamin took up his usual position outside Zara's bedroom, but she left the door cracked open and they talked in the darkness until sleep claimed them both. Benjamin woke once to the familiar nightmare of explosions and screaming horses, and Zara's voice pulled him back, steady and sure from her doorway. "You are in Colorado," she reminded him. "You are safe. I am here." His breathing steadied and he found her silhouette in the dim hallway. "Thank you. My father taught me the words that help. Come back to me, Benjamin. The war is over." "The war is over," he repeated, testing the truth of it. The attack came on the 7th day, just as Benjamin had predicted. He spotted the riders approaching an hour before noon, 3 men on horseback moving with the casual confidence of people who did not expect serious resistance. The tall one with the scar was in the lead, and Benjamin recognized the shorter man with the limp from Zara's descriptions. "We have company," he called to Zara, who was in the kitchen. 3 riders, maybe 10 minutes out. Get your derringer and position yourself in the back room like we discussed. Zara appeared with her weapon in hand, her face pale but determined. What are you going to do? Talk to them first, shoot them if talking does not work. Go now, and do not come out unless I call for you or you hear gunfire. She caught his arm as he turned. Do not die protecting me, Benjamin. I would rather lose the inheritance than lose you. I do not plan on either outcome. He kissed her quickly, fiercely, then moved to the front porch with his rifle. The riders stopped 50 feet from the house, far enough to make conversation difficult but close enough to demonstrate they were not intimidated. This is private property, Benjamin called out. State your business or move along. The scarred man smiled, an expression that did not reach his eyes. We are here to speak with Miss Northwood. We have a message from her uncle. Miss Northwood is not receiving visitors. You can leave your message with me. I am afraid the message is of a personal nature. We really must insist on speaking with her directly. Benjamin levered a round into the rifle's chamber, the metallic sound carrying clearly in the mountain air. And I must insist you turn around and ride back to wherever Victor Northwood is paying you from. This conversation is over. The shorter man's hand drifted toward his pistol, but the scarred man held up a restraining hand. No need for violence, friend. We are simply delivering a message. Mr. Northwood wants his niece to know that her legal claims will be challenged in every court in Colorado, and that the process will be expensive and lengthy and ultimately unsuccessful. He is prepared to offer a generous settlement if she agrees to withdraw her claims and return to Denver. She is not interested. Perhaps you should let the lady speak for herself. The lady hired me to speak for her, Benjamin said flatly. Now you have delivered your message. Leave. The scarred man's expression hardened. You are making this more difficult than it needs to be. We are authorized to use whatever persuasion is necessary. Then I suggest you go back and tell Mr. Northwood that his persuasion ran into someone who does not scare easily. I have been blown apart by artillery and put back together with determination and spite. 3 hired guns on horseback do not impress me. For a long moment, the standoff held, 3 men weighing their orders against the clearly damaged veteran who looked like he had nothing left to lose. Benjamin let them see the scars on his arms, let them understand that he was intimate with violence in ways they could only pretend to be. The scarred man finally nodded slowly. This is not over. It never is, Benjamin agreed, but it is over for today. The riders turned and departed at a measured pace designed to preserve dignity. Benjamin watched until they disappeared beyond the hills, then allowed himself to breathe again. His hands were shaking, adrenaline flooding his system in the old familiar way, and he forced himself to count backwards from 10 until the shaking stopped. Zara emerged from the back room, her derringer still gripped tightly. Are they gone? For now. They will report back to your uncle, and he will decide whether to escalate or negotiate. He will escalate, Zara said with certainty. Victor does not back down once he has committed to a course of action. He will see your defiance as a personal insult. Benjamin set down his rifle and pulled Zara into his arms, feeling her heart racing against his chest. Then we prepare for the next attempt. But right now we are safe, and that is enough. They stood together on the porch, watching the empty road, and Benjamin felt the strange duality of fear and contentment that came from having something worth protecting. The next days were tense, waiting for Victor Northwood's response. Benjamin increased his patrols and slept in shorter intervals, always maintaining awareness of the approaches to the house. Zara continued her legal work with single-minded focus, corresponding with her lawyer and assembling documentation that would support her claims to her father's estate. In the evenings, they found refuge in each other. Benjamin told Zara about his childhood in Virginia, the horses his family had raised and the valley where he had learned to ride. Zara described her mother's garden in Denver and the way her father would return from the mines with rock samples, explaining the geology of silver deposits with the enthusiasm of a man who loved his work. "He would have liked you," Zara said one night as they sat close together on the porch. "He respected men who understood duty and followed through on their commitments." "I would have liked to meet him," Benjamin replied. "Any man who raised a daughter like you did something remarkable. He gave me the tools to fight for myself, but he also left me with a battle I am not sure I can win. Victor has more money and more influence and more willingness to bend the rules. But you have something he does not. What is that? You are fighting for what is rightfully yours, not trying to steal what belongs to someone else. That gives you a kind of strength that money cannot buy." Zara leaned her head against his shoulder, fitting into the space beside him as though she had been designed for it. "I am glad you are here, Benjamin. I do not think I could face this alone." "You are not alone." They made love for the first time on the 11th night, a slow and careful exploration that honored both desire and damage. Zara traced every scar with her fingers and lips, learning the map of Benjamin's survival, and he discovered that her body held its own history of pain, a thin line along her ribs where she had fallen from a horse at 14, and broken bones that had healed slightly crooked. "We are both scarred," she whispered as they lay tangled together in her bed, "both survivors of things that tried to break us. But we are still here," Benjamin said, pulling her closer. "Still fighting, still breathing, still capable of this." "Of what?" "Of loving someone despite every reason not to." Zara propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the moonlight filtering through the window. "Is that what this is? Love?" Benjamin considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think it might be. I know that the thought of you being hurt makes me more afraid than any battle I have fought. I know that your voice pulls me back from nightmares that used to swallow me whole. I know that I want to see what you look like 10 years from now, 20 years, however many years we can steal from a world that has already tried to kill us both." Tears slid down Zara's cheeks, catching the moonlight. "I love you too. I did not think I would ever say that to anyone. I thought my life would be mining contracts and legal battles, and proving myself in a world that did not want to make room for me. But then you walked into my hotel corridor and looked at me like I was worth protecting, and everything changed." They kissed with the tenderness of people who understood how fragile happiness could be, and made love again with greater urgency, staking a claim on the future they were building together. The lawyer arrived from Denver on the 13th day, a precise man named Hamilton who brought documents requiring Zara's signature and news of Victor Northwood's legal maneuvering. They sat around the kitchen table while Hamilton explained the situation in terms weighted with precedent and statute. "Your uncle has filed challenges in 3 different jurisdictions, claiming undue influence and mental incapacity on the part of your father. He has also suggested that the will may have been forged, though he has provided no evidence to support that claim." "Can he win?" Zara asked. "Not on the merits, but he can delay the process significantly. These cases could take years to fully resolve, during which time the estate's assets would be frozen." "Years I cannot afford to wait," Zara said. "The mining operations require active management, and the longer they sit idle, the more value they lose." Hamilton adjusted his spectacles. "There is another option. If you were to marry, your husband would have legal standing to manage the estate on your behalf, at least until the challenges are resolved. Victor could not claim that a married woman with an adult partner was being unduly influenced. Benjamin felt Zara's eyes on him before she spoke. "Mr. Hamilton, would you excuse us for a moment?" The lawyer gathered his papers and stepped onto the porch, leaving them alone in the kitchen. Zara took Benjamin's hands, holding them tightly. "I am not going to ask you to marry me because it solves a legal problem," she said firmly. "If we are going to do this, it needs to be for the right reasons." "What are the right reasons?" Benjamin asked, though he thought he knew the answer. "Because we love each other. Because we fit together in ways that make us both stronger. Because when I imagine my future, you are in every part of it." Benjamin kissed her knuckles, feeling the calluses that matched his own. "I have spent 5 years believing I was too damaged for this, that the scars went too deep to allow for normal things like love and marriage and building a life. But you make me think that maybe I was just waiting for someone brave enough to see past the damage to whatever is still good underneath." "You are not damaged, Benjamin. You are a survivor, and survivors know how to hold on when everything else is falling apart. So I am asking, not because my lawyer suggested it or because it solves my legal problems, but because I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" It was the easiest decision Benjamin had ever made. Yes. They called Hamilton back inside and explained their decision. The lawyer's expression remained professionally neutral, but Benjamin caught a hint of satisfaction in the man's eyes. "I can prepare the necessary documents and arrange for a marriage to take place within the week. Once you are legally wed, Mr. James will have the authority to act on behalf of the estate, which should considerably strengthen your position." "How quickly can we move on the mining contracts?" Zara asked. "Immediately after the marriage. I have already prepared preliminary agreements with several buyers who are interested in the silver ore. Once Mr. James signs as co-owner, we can proceed." The wedding took place 5 days later in Platteville's small church, witnessed by Marshal Thornton and a handful of townsfolk who had grown curious about the scarred veteran and the wealthy woman he protected. Zara wore a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, and Benjamin borrowed a suit from the general store that almost fit his frame. Reverend Morrison performed the ceremony with the brisk efficiency of a man who had married many frontier couples and understood that survival mattered more than sentiment. But when he instructed Benjamin to kiss his bride, the moment stretched into something transcendent, a promise sealed with lips and breath, and the certain knowledge that they had chosen each other despite every obstacle. "I love you," Benjamin whispered against Zara's mouth. "I love you," she replied, and they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, partners in law and life. The legal battles continued, but with Benjamin's signature on contracts and his presence as Zara's husband, Victor Northwood's challenges began to crumble. The mining operations resumed under their joint management, and Zara proved to have her father's instinct for the business. Benjamin learned the operations alongside her, bringing a strategic mind that had been sharpened on battlefields to the challenges of extraction and negotiation. Victor made one final attempt at intimidation, sending a letter that threatened violence if they did not withdraw their claims. Benjamin responded by riding to Denver with Marshal Thornton and 2 deputies, confronting Victor in his office with a simple message. "Your niece is now my wife," Benjamin said, his scarred hands resting on Victor's expensive desk. "Any threat against her is a threat against me, and I have survived worse than anything you can send. The legal challenges are over. Accept the court's decision and move on, or I will make it my life's work to ensure everyone in Colorado knows how you tried to steal from your own family." Victor Northwood, faced with a veteran who looked like he had already died once and come back meaner, agreed to drop his challenges. The lawyers finalized the settlement within a month, and Zara took control of her inheritance without further interference. They remained in the house outside Platteville, finding that the isolation suited them both. Zara managed the mining operations from a study she converted into an office, corresponding with foremen and buyers while Benjamin oversaw the property and learned the business. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the plains, talking about the future they were building together. Benjamin's nightmares gradually became less frequent, the war receding into memory rather than constant presence. Zara's voice remained his anchor, pulling him back whenever the darkness threatened, and he learned to trust that someone would always be there when he woke gasping and reaching for weapons that were no longer needed. "You ever regret it?" Zara asked him one evening, almost a year after they had married. "Giving up your freedom to protect a stranger who turned out to be far more complicated than a simple guard job." Benjamin pulled her closer, feeling the familiar rightness of her body against his. "Not once. You gave me something I thought I had lost at Antietam." "What was that?" "A reason to be alive instead of just surviving." They made love that night with the lazy thoroughness of people who knew they had time, who understood that the urgency of those first frantic couplings had evolved into something deeper and more sustainable. Afterward, as they lay wrapped around each other, Zara placed Benjamin's hand on her stomach. "I am pregnant," she said quietly. "About 3 months along, the doctor thinks." Benjamin felt his world reorganize around this new truth, fear and joy colliding in his chest where shrapnel had once lodged. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be." "Are you happy?" "I am terrified," he admitted. "But yes, I am happy. I am so happy I cannot quite believe it is real." "It is real," Zara assured him. "All of this is real. We survived, Benjamin. We fought through everything that tried to break us, and now we get to live the life we chose." Their son was born the following spring, a healthy boy they named Thomas after Zara's father. Benjamin held his son for the first time with shaking hands, marveling at the tiny, perfect creature who represented everything good he had somehow been allowed to claim from a life that had begun with violence. "Hello, Thomas," he whispered, touching the baby's soft cheek. "I promise to teach you how to be brave and kind and how to protect the things you love. I promise to be here, to never let the past steal me away from your future." Zara watched from the bed, exhausted and radiant, and smiled at the sight of her husband cradling their child. "You are going to be a wonderful father." "I am going to try," Benjamin said. "That is all any of us can do." They raised Thomas in the house on the hill, teaching him about silver mining and horses and the importance of standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. Benjamin found that fatherhood gave him a new kind of purpose, a reason to keep pushing back against the darkness that still sometimes threatened to overwhelm him. 2 years after Thomas was born, Zara became pregnant again, and they welcomed twin daughters they named Alina and Grace. The house filled with noise and chaos and love, and Benjamin discovered that the laughter of children could reach places inside him that he had thought were permanently scarred closed. The mining business thrived under their management, and they became known throughout Colorado as fair dealers who treated their workers well and honored their contracts. Benjamin's military experience proved valuable in negotiating disputes and assessing risk, and gradually the town began to see him as more than just the scarred veteran who had arrived broken and alone. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zara surprised Benjamin with a gift, a small painting she had commissioned from a traveling artist. It showed the house on the hill at sunset, 3 children playing in the yard while 2 figures sat close together on the porch. "This is how I see us," she said as Benjamin studied the image. not as people defined by our scars or our struggles, but as a family who chose each other and built something beautiful. Benjamin hung the painting in their bedroom, where they could see it every morning, and remember why they had fought so hard for the life they were living. The scars on his chest and arms remained, would always remain, but they had become simply part of his history rather than the entirety of his identity. The children grew, and Benjamin taught his son to ride and shoot and understand the value of keeping your word. He taught his daughters that strength came in many forms, and that intelligence and determination were worth more than any inheritance. Zara managed the family business with the same fierce competence she had brought to claiming her father's estate, and together they became a force in Colorado politics, advocating for mining safety regulations and fair treatment of workers. Marshall Thornton retired and was replaced by a younger man, but the marshal would still visit the house on the hill, sitting on the porch with Benjamin and swapping stories about the early days of Platteville. "You know," Thornton said during one such visit, "when I first sent you to guard that hotel room, I thought I was just solving a temporary problem. I never imagined you would end up building all of this." Benjamin looked out over the property, watching Thomas help his sisters build a fort from scrap lumber. "Neither did I. I came to Colorado thinking I was running from my past. Turned out I was running toward my future. I just did not know it yet. Zara was the best thing that ever happened to you. She was the first good thing that happened to me after a very long stretch of bad things. She made me believe that surviving might actually be worth the effort." The years continued to pass, measured in birthdays and anniversaries and the steady expansion of the mining operations. Benjamin's hair began to show silver at the temples, and Zara developed a few lines around her eyes that Benjamin thought made her even more beautiful. They grew old together with the patient accumulation of shared experience, building a life that honored both their pasts and their present. Thomas took over much of the mining business when he turned 25, showing his mother's head for numbers and his father's strategic thinking. Eleanor became a teacher, opening a school in Platteville that educated children regardless of their family's ability to pay. Grace surprised everyone by developing a passion for geology, studying rock formations and ore deposits with scientific precision that would have made her grandfather proud. On their 25th anniversary, Benjamin and Zara took a trip to the mountains, just the two of them, leaving the children to manage the property for a week. They camped beside a high alpine lake, sleeping under stars that seemed close enough to touch. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if I had not hired you?" Zara asked as they lay wrapped in blankets beside their fire. "Sometimes," Benjamin admitted. "I think I would have kept drifting, taking odd jobs and trying to outrun memories that never get tired of chasing. I might have drunk myself to death, or gotten killed in a barroom fight, or simply faded away into nothing. But instead you are here. Instead I am here, with you, having lived a life I could never have imagined when I was lying in that hospital bed with metal in my chest. You saved me, Zara. Not just from your uncle's hired guns, but from myself." "We saved each other," she corrected. "I was drowning in legal battles and family betrayal, and the weight of expectations I did not know how to carry. You showed me that strength did not mean doing everything alone, that asking for help was not weakness but wisdom." They made love under the stars, their bodies familiar but still capable of surprising each other, still able to generate heat and hunger despite 25 years of marriage. Afterward, they talked until dawn, remembering the early days of fear and uncertainty and the gradual building of trust that had become love. Benjamin's nightmares never completely disappeared, but they became rare enough that he could go months without waking in a cold sweat, reaching for weapons that were safely stored away. When they did come, Zara's presence remained his anchor, her voice pulling him back from the battlefield to the bedroom they shared, to the life they had built in the aftermath of survival. He continued to carry the shrapnel in his shoulder, the metal that doctors had deemed too dangerous to remove. It ached in cold weather and reminded him of mortality on particularly hard days, but it also served as a reminder that he had survived something meant to kill him. The scars on his chest and arms became simply part of the landscape of his body, noticed but no longer remarkable, certainly no longer shameful. Zara's father's house became their home in the truest sense, filled with generations of memory and love. They added rooms as the family grew, expanded the stables for the horses they bred, and planted gardens that provided vegetables through the long Colorado summers. The property became known throughout the region as a place where travelers were welcome and workers were treated fairly, a reputation that reflected the values Benjamin and Zara had built their marriage on. On Benjamin's 50th birthday, the family gathered for a celebration that brought together mining partners, town officials, and friends they had accumulated over the years. Thomas gave a toast that made his father's eyes water, speaking about the lessons he had learned from a man who understood that true strength meant protecting others rather than dominating them. "My father taught me that scars are not signs of weakness but evidence of battles survived," Thomas said, raising his glass. "He showed me that loving someone means standing guard over their dreams as fiercely as you would guard their life." He demonstrated every day that the measure of a man is not whether he has been broken, but whether he finds the courage to heal and build something beautiful from the pieces. Benjamin embraced his son, feeling the strength in Thomas's arms and the solid presence of family around him. Zara stood beside him, her hand finding his with the automatic familiarity of decades, and he knew with absolute certainty that every moment of pain and struggle had been worth it to arrive at this point. The mining business eventually passed fully to Thomas, though Benjamin remained available for consultation and strategic advice. He and Zara spent their later years traveling, visiting the places they had only read about, and always returning to the house on the hill outside Platteville, to the porch where they had first kissed, and the bedroom where they had learned to love each other's scars. Alina's school grew into an institution that educated hundreds of children, instilling values of fairness and hard work that reflected her parents' example. Grace published papers on Colorado geology that were read throughout the mining industry, her insights improving safety and efficiency in ways that saved lives. The grandchildren began to arrive, filling the house once again with the chaos and joy of young voices. Benjamin taught his grandchildren to ride, just as he had taught his own children, passing on the skills his own father had given him so many years ago in Virginia. He told them stories about the war when they were old enough to understand, not glorifying the violence but explaining the costs and emphasizing the importance of finding ways to resolve conflicts without bloodshed. "Your grandmother saved my life," he would tell them as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Not just once, but every day for more than 30 years. She taught me that surviving was not enough, that I needed to find reasons to live rather than just reasons not to die." Zara would smile at these recitations, adding her own perspective. "And your grandfather taught me that strength comes in many forms, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help and trust someone else to stand beside you." They grew old together with grace, their bodies slowing but their minds remaining sharp and engaged. Benjamin's scars became simply part of the landscape of his aging skin, no more or less significant than wrinkles or spots. The shrapnel in his shoulder occasionally set off aches that predicted weather changes, and Zara would prepare hot compresses and sit with him until the pain faded. On their 40th anniversary, the family organized a celebration that brought together 3 generations. The house overflowed with children and grandchildren, with business partners and old friends, with people whose lives had been touched by the couple who had chosen each other during a moment of crisis and built something enduring from that choice. Benjamin stood to give a toast, his voice still strong despite the years. 40 years ago, I was hired to stand outside a hotel room door and protect a woman I had never met. I was broken in ways I did not fully understand, carrying scars that ran deeper than the ones you could see. I thought my life was essentially over, that I was just going through the motions until the war finally finished killing me. But Zara saw something in me that I could not see in myself. She saw a man worth trusting, worth loving, worth building a life with. She took my damaged hands and placed them on dreams I did not know I was allowed to have. She stood beside me through nightmares and legal battles, and all the small daily struggles of building something real. These 40 years have been the greatest gift I could never have imagined. Every morning I wake up beside this woman. I am grateful for the bullet that did not quite kill me, for the shrapnel that missed my heart, for every moment of survival that led me to that hotel corridor in Platteville. I love you, Zara Northwood James, more today than yesterday and less than tomorrow. Zara rose and kissed him, and the room erupted in applause and cheers. They danced that night, moving slowly to music played by Thomas on a fiddle he had learned as a boy, and Benjamin held his wife close, feeling her heartbeat against the scars on his chest. "We did well, did we not?" Zara asked as they swayed together. "We did better than well. We built something that will outlast us, something that matters. I love you, Benjamin James. I have loved you since the moment you refused to be intimidated by my problems or scared away by the size of the fight I was facing. I love you too. You made me believe that damaged things could still be beautiful, that scars could be evidence of survival rather than marks of defeat." They continued to dance while their family watched. 2 people who had found each other during a moment of desperation and chosen to transform that moment into a lifetime. The scars on Benjamin's chest and arms, the shrapnel still lodged near his heart, the nightmares that occasionally still surfaced, all of it became simply part of the story they told together, woven into the larger narrative of building a family and a business and a life worth living. Benjamin James lived to see his great-grandchildren, tiny perfect beings who carried forward the legacy he and Zara had created. He told them about the war when they asked, but mostly he told them about their great-grandmother, about the woman who had looked past the damage to see the man underneath, who had trusted him to guard her door and ended up trusting him with her heart. When he finally passed, at 78 years old, it was peacefully in the bed he had shared with Zara for more than 50 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had known nothing but his love and protection. His last words were for his wife, whose hand he held until the very end. "Thank you," he whispered, "for seeing me, for saving me, for loving me." "Thank you for staying," Zara replied, tears streaming down her face, "for fighting through the darkness, for building this beautiful life with me." Zara lived another 5 years, managing the family business with Aliner's help and spending time with the great-grandchildren who brought her joy. She never remarried, claiming that she had already experienced the greatest love of her life and saw no reason to settle for anything less. She was buried beside Benjamin on the hill overlooking Platteville, in a plot they had chosen years earlier for its view of the mountains and the town they had helped build. The headstone was simple, carved with their names and the years that bracketed their time together, but also with an inscription Zara had requested. They survived, they loved, they built something beautiful. The house remained in the family for generations, each group of children adding their own stories to the walls while honoring the foundation that Benjamin and Zara had laid. The mining business evolved with the times, always maintaining the principles of fair dealing and worker protection that had been established at the beginning. Thomas passed down the story of how his parents met, how a scarred veteran looking for purpose had found it guarding the door of a determined woman fighting for her inheritance. He told his children about the courage it took for two damaged people to choose each other, to believe that their scars did not disqualify them from happiness. Alina used the story in her teaching, illustrating the power of seeing past surface damage to recognize the value underneath. Grace referenced it in her geological work, drawing parallels between the way pressure and heat transform rock and the way hardship can transform people into something stronger than they were before. The legacy that Benjamin and Zara built together extended far beyond their family. The schools Alina established continued to educate children with an emphasis on fairness and opportunity. The mining safety regulations they had advocated for saved countless lives. The example they set of a marriage built on mutual respect and shared struggle influenced how their children and grandchildren approached their own relationships. In Platteville, the story became legend, told in saloons and churches, and anywhere people gathered to swap tales of the town's history. The scarred veteran who had arrived broken and alone, who had found purpose guarding a wealthy woman's door, who had fallen in love and built an empire on the foundation of that love. It was a story that resonated because it was true, because people could see the evidence of it in the family that still bore the James name, in the businesses that still operated on principles established decades earlier. But the real legacy was simpler and more profound than business success or community influence. It was the proof that damaged people could heal each other, that scars did not define destinies, that love could take root in the most unlikely circumstances and grow into something that sustained generations. Benjamin James had arrived in Colorado expecting nothing more than distance from his past. He had carried shrapnel in his chest and nightmares in his mind, believing himself too broken for anything resembling a normal life. But standing outside that hotel room door, meeting the fierce green eyes of a woman who needed protection, he had found the first thread of a future he could believe in. Zara Northwood had been fighting battles on multiple fronts, struggling to claim what was rightfully hers while defending herself against family betrayal and hired threats. She had been exhausted and afraid and determined not to show either emotion. But when she opened her door to find a scarred veteran who looked at her like she was worth protecting, she had recognized something familiar, someone else who understood what it meant to survive despite overwhelming odds. Together, they had built something that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. The guard position had evolved into partnership, partnership into love, love into a family that would carry their values forward long after they were gone. The shrapnel scars that covered Benjamin's chest and arms became simply part of the story, evidence not of defeat but of survival, of battles won at terrible cost but won nonetheless. And in the end, that was the truth that mattered most. They had survived. They had found each other. They had loved fiercely and well, and built a life that honored both the struggles they had endured and the dreams they had dared to pursue. The scarred cowboy veteran had found purpose guarding her door, but he had found salvation in what came after, in the years of partnership and love that transformed protection into devotion and duty into joy. Their story ended not with violence or tragedy, but with the quiet satisfaction of lives well lived, of children raised and businesses built, and love sustained across decades. It was a Western love story in the truest sense, forged in a harsh landscape by people who understood that survival sometimes required standing guard, and sometimes required letting someone stand guard over you, who knew that the deepest scars often marked the strongest hearts.